Welcome back to the Midnight Hour Show. You have reached the Midnight Hour on the Fringe.
Welcome back, my friends. It's time for the Midnight Hour Show. Last week we heard from Michael Horn, Billy Meier's biggest supporter and U.S. media representative. This week I thought we'd flip the coin and let you hear from the case's biggest detractor and skeptic, Kal Korff. Let's get into it, folks. Listen, I don't know, I don't really have a game plan except that we could start with Billy Meier, and then I'd like to ask you I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Roswell. Maybe we could get into this Annie Jacobs stuff and some of the other stuff that I've heard you've been talking about on your show.
Anything you want.
Yeah, I got all your books, and I got to tell you, I'm so happy to get to talk to you in person because, you know, I started my show, and then it just sort of organically went the way of let's bust cosmic con men and fakes and frauds, and everybody kept mentioning you to me, and I kept saying, yeah, I got his books. It's one of the people that kind of inspired me to look deep into some of these people and see through the deception and the profiteering to get to the truth, you know, and place them aside. And you've been doing this forever. How did you get started with that kind of thing?
I started on October 17th, 1973. I officially make the 19th as my so-called anniversary, meaning I was in 6th grade. I was 11 years young. And at that time in our class, every student had to bring in a newspaper clipping of whatever was going on in the news. It was up to you. You picked whatever the subject. You had to tell the teacher, you know, they went around the room every morning, called on you, you had to spend 30 seconds to summarize it like you were a little newscaster or whatever. So one day on October 17th and through the 18th, 19th, 1973, for the next few days, everybody, without exception, brings in articles on UFOs. I'm like, what the hell is going on? You know, I don't know what's going on. And our family was the only one who didn't subscribe to a newspaper. My dad just didn't want to pay 10 cents a day, for one. And he was
my dad.
Yeah, he just, you know, he watched the news on TV in the evening when he got home, and that was his thing. And I listened to the radio. So what happened is I collected all these newspaper clippings, and I have many of them still today. And there was this one case, and you may remember it. It was quite famous, and it's since pretty much disappeared off the radar. This was a case in Falkville, Alabama in 1973 on October 19th, or 17th, where a police chief named Jeffrey Greenhaw, he claims he got a phone call to go out to investigate this UFO report out in the boonies. Goes out there, sees this creature standing on the road, takes 4 Polaroid photos from a distance of as close as about 10 feet away, the last 2 photos. Then the creature supposedly runs away. The policeman chases him, spins out. This is the chief of police. So that case hooked me because even as being 11 years old, I'm thinking, okay, either it's real or it's not. Duh. At least we can know. And if it is real, the ramifications of this are infinite. If it isn't real, we're really screwed up because there's this mass delusion, hallucination, whatever you want to call it, going on globally, especially in the U.S., though, about aliens, UFOs, and so on. Some hysteria, we've got nuclear weapons, not a good combo. So that's what got me interested, because I thought that no matter what the answer was to the UFO issue, and it must be considered on a case-by-case basis. You know, there's no single answer for everything. It's not peanut butter here. We can only learn from that. And then that's why the fears I had back then, even as a young kid, of this belief in crazy, stupid things, lack of critical thinking, if it became mainstream, it can really implode a country. And that's what we see happening. We're the divided states of America. We've never been more polarized.
Yeah, I noticed on your show, I was kind of surprised because I know you from your books. I didn't know that you were so interested in politics until I started recently sort of binge catching up on all of your audio shows. Is that a big focus for you right now, as opposed to some of the other research that you've done in the past?
Thanks for asking that question. And again, I appreciate being on your show and love the fact that we're doing this freeform, unrehearsed. To me, it's really the evolution of the overall issue of, let's call it the human condition, whatever you want to call it, whatever's going on with the human evolution, de-evolution maybe, versus how I started off, as somebody who grew up with Bill Moore and Stan Friedman and was pro-UFO, was a Friedmanite until things came between us, which we can come back to a little bit later. It really is an evolution of not only the journalism but life journey, because again, I left the U.S. in the year 2000, and I went to 27 different countries, was gone out of the U.S. for nearly 20 years, and I learned a lot of stuff. And of course, being the only American and then being a Jew in some areas around the world and being in some really crazy remote areas around the world that were not safe, I did a lot of journalism on everything but the paranormal and UFOs, because I learned very quickly that nobody really cares about those subjects once you get outside the U.S., and that's just a fact. The interest level goes way down. And I often got teased about my interest in it because people would find out who I was overseas or whatever. And when I started writing for Daily Post, Daily World, over the years, thousands of articles, full-page specials, a lot of stuff on terrorism, because I left the United States. My last memory of the U.S. was standing in Seattle downtown at the Space Needle on the millennial anniversary of 2000.
Oh, cool.
And
for that.
Well, yes and no. I went there deliberately because the area was closed down. And they had caught a terrorist connected to Al-Qaeda that had come in through the Canadian border. And he was going to bomb the Space Needle or LA International. They weren't quite sure at that time. And I told my wife at the time, I said, I'm not going to let bin Laden tell me what kind of holiday to have. This is the one and only millennium. We're going down there.
Good for you.
And I was working at Boeing at the time, and I knew that this terrorism thing was going to break. It was kind of obvious, and I knew it wasn't just an Israeli Jewish thing. That's just plain stupidity. But America had its head up its you-know-what concerning terrorism, and Bill Clinton let bin Laden off the hook. He could have killed him a couple times, should have taken the shot, but didn't. And, of course, we must remember that shortly after Bill Clinton became president, the first World Trade Center bombing occurred. And that was related to eventually the second Al-Qaeda attack, because it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Ramzi Youssef, who did that bombing. They just went back to finish the job on 9/11.
Yeah.
And so all this was going on, and I saw millennial madness creeping in, and you remember it. There was this huge explosion of crazy paranormal obsessive programming on American TV around the 50th anniversary of Roswell in 1997. There was the Heaven's Gate cult, where the people had killed themselves, and I was warning the media. We did a Fox special, World's Greatest Hoaxes, where we warned people even about the Billy Meier cult, this idea that this is the only place in the world where people are going to gather and be safe when the world ends.
That's coming back, by the way. According to Michael Horn, any day now.
Yeah.
We have a sort of, it's evolving, but I realized when he was telling me this that this wasn't the first rodeo that they've been to. It was they pulled this in 2000 and again in 2012, the same kind of thing. So
yeah, you're right about that. And the Meier cult ultimately is a doomsday cult. And when I say that, what I mean is they're not like counting down the minutes, but here you've got a guy that's their so-called prophet. He's due to reincarnate soon, right? Because he's not going to be around much longer. They've got, everyone only lives a certain age according to their whatever made-up stuff. So what you have is a guy who claims to, be a prophet of the new age, and he's a complete hoaxer and fraud. Before we get into Meier, if I can, as I was, growing up again as a young kid, the first thing I did was I read every book I could get my hands on. I met Stanton Friedman and got to know Jal and Hynek, because there was no internet, and we had to do things with the old Smith Corona typewriter back then, and we used snail mail. I corresponded and got to know all the top researchers, as newspaper clippings from that time prove, and only Friedman and just one or two others knew I was a little kid. All these other people, including Carl,
That's kind of funny, yeah.
yeah, because I'd write them letters. I'd see some article by Carl Sagan, and I'd say, well, I'd have an opinion on that, and I'd write him, and I'd reference someone we both knew. And unless they knew, that person knew, like Friedman, they were classmates, ironically, knew my age, they thought I was an adult, which was funny. And then I tried to get the media to hide my age, but they wouldn't do that, of course, because they said that's the story. And I said, that's ridiculous. It should be the data, not the messenger, Sure. So anyway, as I got to know Wendell Stevens in high school, so I've known him way before Meier case even happened. We traded UFO photos. I had the third largest photo collection at that time, and gave it up basically when I left the U.S. Had to, because it wouldn't fit on a plane. And what happened was this Meier thing came up, and I'd heard about it independent of Wendell. I was friends with Major Coleman von Kavitsky of the old ICUFON network, of Hans Jakob, who was the official keeper of the Meier photo binder. He lived at the bottom of the mountains where Meier lives and his cult is. So I knew these European researchers, and we all knew each other, and Wendell and I, studied cases together, corresponded, and then I said, hey, how can I help with the Meier thing? I even speak German, and because I did in high school. And for the first time ever, Wendell was defensive and very guarded, and that just didn't seem like the Wendell I knew. So something was going on. And then a friend of mine brought their book that had just come out, UFO Contact from the Pleiades, Volume 1. And I looked at the back section on the computer analysis of UFO photos that was in that book. And I saw immediately that either the person who laid out the book didn't know what they were doing, or the people who laid out the book knew what they were doing, they're committing fraud. Because all the right words were there technically, but the images didn't match the technical BS under them. So there were only two ways to explain it. Wendell admitted to me he was a 1/4 partner in Genesis 3 Productions, the company that did it. And it turned out that that whole publication of that book was basically a scam. It went to court, as I showed in my expose book, Spacious of the Pleiades, the Billy Meier story.
Yeah, if anybody is interested, I have to say, if anybody is interested in how do you get to the truth behind what I term as some of these cosmic con men, and Billy Meier is one of the original cosmic con men, Kal's book is amazing. It's amazing the work that you did to kind of prove that this was all fake and fraudery and fakery, and I remember getting that book and being a mix. This is a long. I don't know when I read it, but it was a mix of being let down. I mean, anybody. I could look at the photographs and go, these are models. I built models as a kid, not UFO models, but it seemed pretty obvious to me that these are fake photos and everything. But when I got your book, it was amazing to me, all of the work that you did to prove that this was all a con.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that book evolved quite by accident. And I thank you for bringing up that point. Because what happened is when Wendell was defensive, and here I'm in high school and I know him, I'm starting to write a magazine column in the old Saga UFO Report magazine called UFO Photophile. And Hayden Hughes used to write it, and I took it over with Bill Spalding. And we used computers to look at computer imagery. And of course, I lived near NASA Ames, and I knew Dr. Andrew Grotowski, Dr. Richard Haynes, knew everybody again, and they knew my age, one of the few people. And what happened was when I started looking at different versions of the Meier photos that were coming from Europe, that were uncropped, unedited, they weren't color corrected, photos from the actual binders, I started to see problems. And one of the things that you can see if you look at the original UFO Contact from the Pleiades books, and it was Ray Stanford, of all people, who first told me about this. He deserves credit for it. I mention it in the book. if you look at the big photos, in their big photo book, if you look very carefully, you'll see these little round dots in the background. And those are balloons. They're balloons. And the question is, what are those balloons doing back there? Either they're very large balloons that happen to be there at the right time, the right place, well, the Pleiadians are there too, or they're part of the, hoax. And what I found out when I went there is that helium is imported in Switzerland, 100%. They don't grow it there, so to speak. And there's only one place it comes into, Pangas, Pangas. They're in Zurich, and then of course it's distributed from Zurich out to nearby Winterthur, which is near Hinterschmidt-Ruti, and Wetzikon, and so on. And they have all these little festivals going on. We were able to get it quite easily. And of course, everyone recognized the Meier photos, and he's become a bit of a tourist thing up there. So what happened is I simply wrote an article about the Meier case. It was the lead cover story of Soggy UFO Report, I think in December of 1980. I might have the year and issue wrong, but it was the main story. And at that point, people began to hate me. Suddenly I was a CIA disinfo agent.
Yeah,
Suddenly I was a debunker.
I know something about that. I've been called a disinformation agent, and I'm just trying to throw people off the trail. And,
Yeah.
if they can't argue with the messenger and the evidence the messenger presents, then they try to kill the messenger. And I'm sure you've gotten it 10 times worse than me.
Well, yeah, I mean, even these ridiculous, death threats you get, which, I just turn them over to the right people, like the police. But so right away, this is a red flag because, here I am exposing one case, a single case. It's an elaborate hoax. He's done it many times, but it's a hoax. It's a case as a hoax. And then everybody thinks I'm saying there's no UFOs, no life anywhere in the universe. We're it, folks. Take it or leave it. Now, where the hell does any of that have to do with anything? Nothing. But people are that much of being stupid about this because they don't think critically. They're letting emotions lead them around. And so this is what I've noticed. And so I wrote this article. And then all of a sudden, after it comes out, I get a phone call from Genesis. They were mad. Wendell was mad. And what happened is they came to the Bay Area in a thing called UFO 80 conference. And we went there. It was, close by. And I met Jim Delatoso for the first time. Wendell was there, so on. And then we got into it there, as I wrote in the book. And then I added to this paper I had written. And then I met Marcel Vogel. I had actually met him when I wrote the original expose paper. He actually showed me a piece of the metal from the Meier spacecraft. It's obvious to me why it later disappeared, so to speak, because this scientist who wasn't a metallurgist, he was a chemist, so he wasn't qualified to do the metal analysis they'd given credit for. Not only could Marcel Vogel claim he could bend metal with his mind, he had psychic powers, he was a fraud that way. But you know what a little coin purse is that you squeeze with your hand, and then you can reach in there and grab a penny or two?
Sure.
Well,
sure.
This is where he kept the Meier samples. I'm not making this up. When he handed them to me, he reaches in his pocket, grabs this little coin pouch, and I'm thinking he's going to hand me some coins. I'm like, I don't know why. And then he pulls out this little piece of metal and says, here it is. And he says, Meier's a hoaxer, but Semyazi's real. And I'm like, oh, God, how am I going to report that? So I reported it. So all of a sudden, my article goes to being around 120-something pages or whatever. And then the Genesis people, after we met in Oakland and got into it, they called. Jim Delatoso comes out to Sunnyvale 2 weeks later, spends all day with us, Al Reed, Barbara Reed, myself. We all knew the Heinechts, as in Dr. Heineck. And he tries to convince us to go to his side. We recorded the whole thing. The verbatim transcript appears in the book. And as soon as Delatoso left, I could tell he was lying in the interview. I started checking what he said, and then I reported a retort after every paragraph in the book. And suddenly Bill Moore, he tells me, he says, you have enough material here for a book. I'll publish the book for you. I'll pay for it. Why don't we do it? And that's how the first book, The Meier Incident, came out in high school. It was 128 pages or something. It's a collector's item today. And it sold out, went through a couple printings. And I told Bill Moore, I don't like the book. I want to go to Switzerland and go to the scene of the crime, so to speak. And he said, well, I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to pay for that. And I wasn't going to pay for it. And I'm, just getting out of high school. I've got other things to do. But I want to do that. And so I had a chance to, years later in 91, go to Switzerland undercover. By then, people knew where my stand was, and I was able to get a lot more stuff. This time, I went to Switzerland undercover. That's what the book is about. And I was given original Meier evidence that was from the 70s, given by Meier himself. His handwriting's on the back of the photos. Got all that stuff, posed as a believer named Steve Thomas, who went there to get evidence against Kal Korff. They cooperated, not knowing it was really me.
That's amazing.
And
that is an amazing part of the story that I think is... I just want to say that you have tremendous balls. Let's just leave it at that, because I don't think that I would have... I've had a few problems because even just audio-wise, like I've tried to make phone calls as someone else and things, and people sort of pick up on it, like maybe I'm just not good at undercover work. But that's amazing that you went there and did that and they didn't catch on or anything, and they're giving you evidence.
Yeah, I'd like to explain how that happened, because I get falsely accused, and Mikey Horn is one of the people who likes to spread this lie. I'll be blunt. I didn't go there to play games and be melodramatic and sell a book and all that stuff. I knew I would write up whatever I found. I had no idea what I was going to find. I just know I was going to go there, had an opportunity to go there undercover secretly without their knowledge, which means that the barriers that would be there if they're not telling the truth or they're holding something, hiding something, they wouldn't be there theoretically, as opposed to coming as Kal Korff. And I couldn't go as Kal Korff. I tried to go through the front door through Wendell. That was as good as it got. But it wouldn't work because they were not honest people. They were pulling a scam. Consumer fraud is what it is. When you knowingly sell something that is not what you represent it to be, by choice, regardless of the subject, that is by law consumer fraud when you are charging money for it. It's illegal to tell someone you're a psychic and charge them money and give them a reading and all that, because you're selling something that isn't true. In this case, it's fake UFO photos. So
yeah, I've always said this is theft by deception, and it should be considered a crime, especially if you know that it's fake,
Well, it actually is a crime. There's no question. What has not happened is people have not been prosecuted as they should, even though the laws in the U.S., even in liberal California, are very clear. This is consumer fraud, and all it's going to take is for some formal complaint at some point to happen. And I think that's going to happen because I think things are reaching a critical mass. People are investing now, like in TTSA, and they're getting ripped off. And we can come back to that a little bit later. But back to the Meier thing, what happened is I knew I couldn't go as Kal Korff through the front door. I wanted to go there and, do the investigation I always wanted to do. And so I thought, well, how do I get in there? And I knew they hated me because I had, had my run-ins with them. And I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll pretend to be a believer. They love believers. And of course, I'll give them money. They love money. And I was very...
That's one way to convince them, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I threw the Swiss francs around rather liberally. And and then I said, there is this bastard back in the U.S. named Kal Korff. My name is Steve Thomas. I can go back and get him for you. Just give me all your best stuff against him. I'll go do the stuff you guys can't. I'm American. You guys aren't. Nobody will know, you guys' fingerprints won't even be there, And they loved it. And they invited me to join their cult. And what happened is I had established contact secretly with the Jakob family. And they were the people who knew Meier, and Hans Jakob was a Swiss UFO researcher of long standing. And he was the official keeper of the Meier photos. He went out on some of the contacts and all that stuff, appears in some of the photos that Meier took, which were double exposures. where he's standing there in the photo and the UFO appears above their head. And I talked to everybody who was there that day. There was no UFO there. It was double exposure, and you can clearly see it is in these original photos. And so what happened is I stayed with the Jakob family secretly and was going up to the Meier cult all the time. We went out to the same locations. We could walk to many of them. I was surprised how close everything was within walking distance. If you look at the way the Meier photos are deceptively marketed, especially in the photo journals, you think that these contacts occurred all over different parts of Switzerland, meaning, it's a ways away from one location to the other. No, in fact, there were 3 or 4 locations where different contacts and photos have been faked that are in the book where we went to those locations. There's a particular photo taken at Unterbaum where he supposedly went up 10,000 feet in the air for the first time on the board ship for the purpose of taking photos from inside the Palladian spaceship. And I found that location, and it's a little hill overlooking a house with a bench that you can sit there. And all we did is hold the model out above the Lake Pfeffikon in the background, just on our hand. I had Tina Layton who was with me. She worked at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I worked at Lawrence Livermore Lab. That's how we met. And she held the model out. I photographed it from the same angle Meier used. And then it looks, using this forced perspective trick, where a small object close to the camera looks bigger than it really is. That's how we faked the photo. And there's no question they're fakes. You can line up the lake, everything. And I'll tell you the one location, which of course is the most controversial one in the series, but it was the most interesting, was the location at where the tree had disappeared, that later, was zapped back in time, if you know that case. You may remember this UFO sequence where the Meier took these photos of this thing going around the tree. Well, I went to that location. The tree has never been there, and never was there. And I talked to the Weiss family, which is the farm family. I was the first one to name them. And they told me point blank, there's never been a tree there. Yes, they know about this stupid claim because people once in a while knock on their door and say, "Where's the tree?" And I saw,
awesome.
and I saw family photos from their albums over the years, back in the 70s, black and whites. There's no tree there, and they do grow corn there. And the reason that the lake moved, so to speak, and the tree moved in the photos, is because in some of the photos, there's a road that's really close by on the highway that goes up there, that goes up the mountain to the Meier place. And you can be seen from that road with a little UFO model or whatever you're doing. So what Meier had to do, and you can only figure this out by going to that location, and we did that with models, is you have to go further up the hill towards the bench, and that's where you can sit down. There's a couple of them there, and enjoy the view, panoramic view of Lake Pfeffikon. And then he set up the tree and shot down into the valley and from this hill, and that's how we faked those photos. And we know that because the clouds in the background change so fast that you can tell these were taken over a period of several minutes, not just 30 seconds or a minute like he claimed. That's just not true. Clouds don't move that fast in that area, And then of course, with the tree disappearing, there is no tree to the left of those hills. That's an entirely different direction that you can still see today, but you have to go there to see it. In fact, now, actually, I did this a couple years ago in Europe. You can use Google Earth to zoom down to these locations and easily destroy the Meier photos.
Yeah, I've done some Google Earthing around that location and was kind of surprised at how similar some of those scenes still look to some of the Meier photos. It's like the land that time forgot or something. When I had Michael Horn on my show, I really pressed him on this one point, which was that people have identified the trash can lid that comprised the models, and in defense of that, there's some ridiculous explanation that they came out with that the aliens tried to inspire us with their beam ship designs, and somehow we misinterpreted that and made them into trash can lids or something crazy like that. And Michael Horn really did not explain that. He just kind of blew off, because I have a screenshot of them explaining why the trash can, why someone is able to say it's this exact manufactured trash can lid.
Yeah, because, and I've seen it in many countries. It's standard. It's the standard everybody uses. It's very iconic in Europe. In fact, it's the standard they use in India. It comes in different sizes. That's a very popular size. Some of the explanations that have come up with Meier unquestionably have been made up on the fly, and I can prove that he's just outright lied. For example, I don't know if you remember this, it was short-lived, but back in Prague years ago, when I was first doing the original Cal's Corner show on X-Zone, I announced that Michael Horn and I were going to work on a DVD project. And I knew Michael Horn wasn't going to really do that project with me. I knew he was lying. And Michael Horn, for the record, this is my constitutionally protected opinion, I believe is one of the most, based on my direct interactions with him, one of the most dishonest, deceptive, fraudulent UFO promoters out there. And he absolutely is the right person to promote the Billy Meier fraud, because that's what he does. The guy has no ethics, no morals, no scruples. The last debate I had with him on the X-Zone show, which Rob McConnell hosted, was stopped halfway through that show because he couldn't control his temper, couldn't control his behavior.
Yeah, I just interviewed him, and he really lost it a few times, and I had to back myself up and say, look, let's both take a step back, calm down, and we'll continue. Because it's kind of like when you confront him with evidence,
facts.
He gets upset. Yeah, he would get upset. But I will say this in defense of him. The one thing I'll say in defense of him is that he is probably one of the only people who had the courage to come on my show and at least answer the questions. Did he answer them to my satisfaction? No. And, and he would talk for 20 minutes when I asked one question, which is difficult. Yes. But at least he would come on my show, and now he wants to do a part 2, and I'm kind of like, I kind of got what I needed, the first interview was enough, There's not much more there to talk about. We just agree to disagree,
Yeah, then if you've been able to wrap it up in only one show, I congratulate you. And you're certainly familiar with the case. Most of the media people I've talked to over the years don't really know the Meier case, so Michael's able to play all kinds of games.
Well, I have to say I kind of grew up with that, and one of the first UFO books I ever got was one of their books. And even as a child, though, getting this book, I remember going, these photos don't look real, And later, when I got older, I looked into it again, and then once in a while, you're going down these rabbit holes, and here comes a video from Michael Horn or someone else, or I watched Michael Horn's documentaries, and I just disagreed with him, But I'm very familiar with a lot of I even made some models of my own and put them on fishing string, and I found a lot of different methods that I borrowed from magic tricks, believe it or not, to make them even better probably than some of the Billy Meiers. People don't know this, but if you take fishing string and you dot it in black with a marker, it breaks up the line, and it's much, much harder to detect it in the finished photos. And a lot of different, I did a lot of stuff like that on this case to kind of convince myself, am I right that it's fake? But I just kept coming back to Occam's razor. What is the most likely explanation? That this guy's had lifelong contact with aliens and only him? And another problem I have with Michael Horn is that he kind of calls everyone else as a fraud except Billy Meier. Billy Meier's the only genuine case. Everyone else is a fraud. And that's problematic because that is an earmark of a cult. We're the only truth. We're the only people that could give you the truth. Everyone else is a fake and a fraud and a liar, and you won't get the truth from them. But we have it, Yeah,
and let me share with you 2 real examples of, and these are smoking gun examples of how they just make up stuff when they're busted. Back to the DVD project, I knew Michael Horn was never going to really do this. The idea was, and it was my idea, was to do 2 DVDs. One DVD would be my best case against the Meier case, whatever the evidence was. It's not just me, it's other people. The best evidence on one DVD, and then the best evidence for it on the other, led by Michael, whatever he wants. And I thought, honestly, this was a win-win, because no matter what you believe about the case, you've got the prosecution and the defense. This is their best evidence. And I still would do this today if the other side cared.
when this happened, and I vaguely recall that he claims that aliens warned him not to do it or something like that, that you were going to gotcha him or something like that.
Yeah, and this is where he just made it up, because I told my people, and I can name them, I'll do it right now, Phil Langdon, for example. I said, okay, we know what he's going to do. He's going to move the goalposts. We don't know exactly what yet, but there's no way he's going to do this. What we have to do on our end is completely document that we're not going to do anything but what we said. And we really wanted to do this, because I was looking forward to saying, this is all I can say. I'm done. Have a nice day, because I'm tired of this. I got a life. And so what we did is we duplicated every single major Meier photo that is out there, including the wedding cake photos. We even put together a how to build your own Pleiadian fake ships. And we were going to call this Fake Ships of the Pleiades, the Silly Meier story.
Wow,
okay?
Yeah.
and we had another working title, Light Yarns, Fake Ships of the Pleiades, the Silly Meier story. It's too long of a title. And so what happened is we duplicated everything, including the UFO in front of the tree where the sun is bouncing off of it, all that. And we're done. And I contact Michael, and I said, okay, Michael, we're ready to go, waiting for your stuff so I can put together the master images, send them to you, so, we can start putting this together, because he knows how to make a DVD. And then he says, well, let me check with Billy Meier one more time. Yeah, you do that, okay. So Billy Meier goes off, and he talks to the Pleiadians, Pleiarans, whatever the hell he wants to call them. And they warn him that, we're going to pull a Richard Nixon here, and we're just, doing whatever, make up whatever you want. And none of it's true. And then when he comes back and he says, Billy Meier has said, you're going to do this, and they've warned him about you. And I'm just like, yeah, right, whatever. Go back to smoking, whatever. It's all bullshit. So it never happened. You can blame Mikey for it. And if Mikey disagrees with this and wants to lie and say, I'm not telling the truth, he can sue me for libel, slander, defamation, which he won't, because he can't afford to go under oath or penalty of perjury. And I would still do this video with him today, or DVD, because I've got nothing to hide. He does. So that was one example. Let me give you another one that happened because of the publication of the book, Spacious of the Pleiades, the Billy Meier story. That book was the first one to publish the dinosaur time travel photos. It had never been public before. I came back with those photos that Meier himself had given the Jakob family. And again, Meier's writing is on the back of the several of these pictures. So I published them. And then, of course, they were shocked to find out it was really me. There was no Steve Thomas. They were really pissed. And first they said I wasn't there. They lied. Then they saw the book, couldn't argue with the fact I was there. And then all of a sudden, Meier has a contact with Sanyazi, and she says, well, we got some bad news for you. You were sick, and those time travel photos, they're hoaxes. The Men in Black switched them on you, set you up. Sorry about that. We didn't want to tell you. They literally made up that contact to explain how these dinosaur photos and all these time travel things could exist, when I had traced them back to NASA images, various shows, the Dean Martin pictures, all that stuff,
And for those, just for the benefit of my audience, for those who don't know, there's a pretty famous picture of a pterodactyl, which was basically someone took a photograph out of a nature book of a pterodactyl, and it can be proven that this is the same image. And this was supposed to be originally a picture that Billy Meier took when he was time traveling. And when Kal gotcha'd them and said, no, this is where it came from, then they come up with this explanation. And it's the convenient, I call it the very convenient Men in Black explanation. And it's not just Billy Meier that uses this explanation. We have Bob Lazar and many others. Like, they stole that Element 51 back out of my house, or
Yeah.
It's very convenient. Just pull out it's like everybody goes to the same Cosmic Con Man school of conning people. And when you really got your back to the wall, what you got to do is you got to pull out the Men in Black. And it's their fault. They came and they stole the material. They took the good photos and replaced them with fake ones. I pressed Michael Horn on this, and he says that those are fakes and frauds, and that they were put in to discredit Billy Meier or something like that. And yes, the Men in Black explanation.
Yeah, so, here's two examples where you can prove in a court of law easily and by any scientific standard that these explanations are bullshit. Those photos came out because I got them personally from Switzerland, brought them back, put them in the book. Prometheus Books published that book, and then they had some explaining to do. They had spin to do. So, of course, they go off and come up with a contact that explains why these photos are hoaxes. But it's not their fault they're hoaxes. Billy Meier was hoaxed. He's that stupid to have dozens and dozens. There were, 70 or 80-something pictures from these stupid things. And they were images collected from all kinds of different sources, from Fanzan TV over in Europe. Went down there to the station, hunted it down, all that stuff. And I wasn't the only one to find it. A Dean Martin fan had recognized that. And I will tell you how much of a liar Billy Meier was. Most people have never heard the story, because I've never really shared it in detail, of the second major trip I did to expose Meier for Fox TV for World's Greatest Hoaxes. And this was in the late 90s. This is years after a couple years after the Meier expose book had come out from Prometheus. And what happened is I was working with Bob Kiviat, and I knew him, and he had been pitching a show called World's Greatest Hoaxes for years, and Secrets finally revealed. That was a working title. It was really going to be World's Greatest. We weren't quite sure what it was going to be. And I said, well, you got to put Billy Meier in there. And I had heard that Billy Meier had gotten pregnant, a follower of his. I think her name was Ava Bieri, might not have the right name, but a young woman, and it caused a problem with Meier's wife, of course. So she had moved out, and I had a chance to meet her and talk to her and lay the evidence out before her if she was interested against her husband. I assume Billy didn't tell her everything. That's the reports I'd gotten from many people in Europe, that Billy basically considered her, he never involved her in the hoax, I'll just put it that way. I never found any evidence of that. So what happens is before I went after Fox greenlighted the show, they gave us 6 weeks to do the whole special. And I was given a budget to go over undercover again to get Billy Meier's wife on camera if possible. If not, come back with the imagery of the garbage can lid for the wedding cake photos. I promised him I could at least get that because we had found that imagery. So what happened is the Phoenix Lights and these other things were going on. And Art Bell and Jim Delatoso were kind of on the warpath against me. And they wanted to do a debate on the Art Bell show about Billy Meier and Phoenix Lights or whatever. And I agreed to be on that show. We debated, Jim Delatoso and I, for 3.5 hours. It was a live debate with a credibility poll. That was a credibility meter that was based on audience reactions. By the time the show was done, I won the debate 81% to 9% for Delatoso, 9% undecided. And in that debate, Delatoso admitted, and Art pinned him on it, and he agreed with me, that Delatoso had lied about having a PhD from McGill University, that he had committed fraud using NASA stationery with a document that implied that was an endorsement when there wasn't. There was other stuff in there. People can listen to the tape. Meier people don't like to talk about it. People who hate me and attack me think I'm some crazy UFO evil debunker, CIA disinfo, whatever. I don't know. I can't relate to what they say.
To my knowledge, you can still find that show on YouTube, and it's amazing. It's amazing to listen to that.
You should be able to. I mean, even Art Bell, who started out against me on the show, we ended up being friends, and he said I scored a knockout blow, quote unquote. He said that on the show. And
also, then, for those that don't know, Michael Horn is very quick to always say all these image analysts determined the photos are real. And what he's really saying is Jim Delatoso determined the photos are real. And as Kal has pointed out, the guy had a fake education. I have a background in computer science, and I can tell you that he knows a good deal about computers, but he's not an image analyst, not by any stretch of the imagination. And even he's been discredited many, many times. His Phoenix Lights, if you ask a real image analyst, his analysis of that is a joke. And so this is just a source that can't be trusted. You know, if you have a guy who's faking his education, who's faking NASA involvement, and he says the photos are real, I think you have to consider the source. In fairness to him, I don't know what his analysis methods, where he learned them, but he did not. He's just not a valid image analyst that you should trust when he says something.
Yeah, there's a good expose of him and some of the other people he was doing stuff with at that time in the 90s. It's the main story in the Phoenix New Times called The Hack and the Quack. It's about the Phoenix Lights and Delatoso and Francis Barwood and all that stuff that was going on at the time. And it's an expose written by Tony Ortega, and he verified everything. And I'm quoted in there, others are quoted in there. There's no question. And in fact, what Michael does is he, lies about me. He says, "Oh, Kal Korff, an admitted liar." I'm not an admitted liar. What he's referring to is when I had said on Jeff Rentz's show that Art Bell was trying to keep me off the air about the Phoenix Lights from a radio show I was supposed to do in Phoenix. And it turns out that Art Bell had contacted that show, but it was Jim Delatoso who had sent the fax that said, "If you put Kal Korff on there, I'll sue you." And the person who told me this didn't know about Delatoso being the person who had written the fax, and got the two mixed up. And I shared that information on the news. And then when Art said no, it wasn't me, and we found out it was Delatoso, we had the 2 or 3 page fax. It was on the internet many years ago. Then I agreed to go on Art's show and apologize because what I said was not accurate. But as I also said, it was Jim Delatoso, there's no question, and where there was smoke, there was fire. And Delatoso had no right to try to keep me off that show. Show put me on anyway and said, "Go ahead and sue us," and of course that didn't happen. So that's different than making something up and lying. And then I went on Art's show later for 3.5 hours at his request, debating Delatoso, and the rest is history. So Michael Horn, if he doesn't tell you that, he's lying as usual, and Michael does that. As far as the second trip that I had done, I had a problem on my hands in that I couldn't go as Steve Thomas. When I went as Steve Thomas...
can you tell us who you went as this time? Because I think this is an amazing part of your story.
Yeah, and I didn't plan this. It just worked out that way. So here's what we were really doing, and this is going to come out in an updated expose on my Meier book that is going to be out next year. But I've never talked about this publicly. Again, the Meier case was only going to be covered if something new or some breakthrough could occur, because we had alien autopsy, Loch Ness, Bigfoot, all this other good stuff to expose. So what's new on Meier? Well, his wife, okay, maybe she knows something. The garbage can lid is there. That's the minimum. We got that. All right. So I can't go as Steve Thomas. And when I'd gone as Steve Thomas, one of the reasons I had to keep it a secret is because I was on the HyperCard software development team at that time at Apple Claris. And the main guy on our team was a guy named Ed Rosenzweig. And he was in charge of writing the color routines to convert HyperCard from being a black and white program so that it could be color. QuickTime was a new thing that was coming up. I was part of that effort. And Rosenzweig owned a New Age bookstore in, I think it was Sausalito, South San Francisco, maybe Marin. And he knew Wendell Stevens. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't tell my friends what I'm going to do because they know Wendell. I'm like, oh God, what are the odds? And then here's where it gets really almost paranormal, for lack of a better term. Our boss, Bill Duvall, who ran the HyperCard team, he had moved from Sun Valley, Idaho. And in my job interview to be part of that team, he said to me, I've heard about you. There's a guy I know who's into UFOs too. He just wrote a book called Light Years. He's my neighbor, Gary Kinder. I'm like, oh my God. All right, so now my boss is Gary Kinder's neighbor on the Hypercar team. And he has moved from Idaho to Silicon Valley. And Ed Rosenzweig is part of the Hypercar team from Apple. We're all one group now. And I'm supposed to go undercover to blow open the Meier case, where I can't tell my boss why I'm going to Europe for my vacation. Cal never takes a vacation. Wow. This is how secret this whole thing had to be. And my roommate, Roy Neal at Apple, Claris at the time, he's the one who worked with me to make the models and test them in the hills with the balloons and experiment in the Bay Area before we took them to Switzerland. And we had help from a guy named Steve Horsch, who made props for Star Trek. Yeah. So, so all this was going on. And this is why I have the photos in the book of the models, that I took with me. Okay, so now I'm supposed to go back there years later. And again, the first time I grew my hair and beard for over a year, about a year and a half without cutting it. People were thinking I was losing my mind. But I was trying to hide my face and everything so that I wouldn't be recognized. I had my pink HyperCard shoelaces. I had my Klingon, Star Trek, New Agey type look. There's photos of me on the internet looking all hippie-like for my Steve Thomas, persona. Now, all these years later, I'm going back there again. I got to get to know Meier's wife. Hopefully, we'll hit it off. I don't know what she's going to say, if she'll even talk to me at all. Can't go with Steve Thomas. Can't grow my beard and hair. So I went the opposite. I shaved everything off, short, and I decided, I got to come up with a name. Okay, what name am I going to use? And I thought, I've gotten to know the Meier cult more since the expose came out years ago, and they really revere the name Meier, which is stupid. Again, it's more evidence of being a cult. It's like somebody who names their kid Jesus because they admire Jesus. Okay, fine, that doesn't mean you're Jesus. So I thought, okay, Meier what? So what happened is I didn't expect to get my name at all, because normally they don't really pay attention to that. But what happened is a man named Christian, I think Fenner was his name, might have the wrong name, last name. I guess I was told that at that time, he was basically, one of his roles at the cult was to monitor what I do. And what happened is he recognized me, and he said, that's Kal Korff. And here I am in the Meier cult, the second time. And I'm posing as, I made up a name. They asked me my name. And I said, my name is Oscar. They said, Oscar what? And I said, Oscar Meier. And they're like, oh, your last name is Meier. And their face lit up, like Billy Meier. I said, no, my middle name's Meier. And they said, what's your last name? And I said, Wiener. And I didn't say Wiener, I said Wiener, and I speak German. So I said, mein Name ist Oscar Meier Wiener. And they just kept focusing on the middle name Meier. And I explained to them it was spelled differently. It wasn't M-E-I-E-R, it was M-E-Y-E-R. And they had no idea that I was referring to the hot dog, of course, in America. And I did that because I had to have some sanity in the middle of this. I'm now busted in this cult. And I remember years ago them telling me, that if I asked them, I said, what would you do if Kal Korff ever came here? And they told me they would either never let me in or never let me leave. And whether they mean it literally or not, you'd have to ask the morons who said that. But here I am now busted, and I got to find a way to get out of there because they asked me to go get my ID because I, of course, didn't have it on me. And there's two other people with me undercover at this point in the cult. And we were posing as three Americans who happened to meet. The other two people who were with me, one was a woman, one was a man. They were posing as a husband and wife. They were part of my undercover team. And we had prepared a plan B, C, and a D to escape out of there if something went wrong. And what we were trying to do, we already had the photo of the trash can. What we were trying to do with my hidden cameras and some of the footage aired in the Fox special, was the first time a digital high-8 camera had been used for a Fox special. We were trying to find that trash can on the lid on any trash can on the Meier compound, snaking around, and we couldn't find it. The reason we were looking for it is because when they said that this was inspired by the aliens, so it's okay to have it out here in the open, but there's no connection. It doesn't prove the photos were faked with the trash can lid. You know, this bullshit they make up. And it makes you think they make it up with the idea that if someone's stupid enough to believe it, keep bilking them for more money. If they aren't dumb enough to believe it, then we don't care. There's always someone who will be dumb enough to believe it. So what happened is I was looking for the trash can, wandering around by myself, pretending I'm just walking around. I know where I'm going. I'm familiar with the place. And I'm just about to walk into Billy Meier's house when they stopped me. And that's when I pretended not to know where I was supposed to go and everything. Then they guided me back to the area where the visitors are, made me sign, and my signature's illegible anyway, so I signed my normal signature. And then when Christian said, I think that's Kal Korff, that's when they asked me to get my ID. And at this point, a lady sits down next to me, and believe it or not, her name was Brunhilde. And I'm not making it up. It reminds me of a fairy tale. And I had sat next to her years ago undercover. And she looks at me, and I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, boy, this is funny because you have no idea who I am, but I remember you. And she asked me my name again, and I told her it was Oscar. And I didn't want to say all three names again in case somebody knew what an Oscar Mayer Wiener was. And I said, yeah, I'll go get my passport, no problem. So I left to go get my passport, and these two goons, they start following me. And I took advantage of the fact that the road was curved, so that when I rounded a corner, I would run a little bit and then slow down, so that by the time they got to that corner, I was much further ahead. And I had made a point to park the car, our so-called getaway car, in a way where I could easily get in there and leave. So I told them I have to go to my car, get my passport, be right back. So I went there, and I'm in the car at this point, and I lean over, pretending like I'm going to get my glove compartment to get my passport, and I start the engine and turn around and leave. Now at this point, they're gone, and to make sure nobody followed me, I threw a bunch of ninja spikes, I'm not making this up, out the back window. This way they couldn't get in the car and follow me on this road, which is narrow down the hill, because they're going to have a flat tire. But now I have a problem in that two of my people are there, and they had instructions on how to get out of there gracefully if there was a problem. So what I'm about to share with you now is what they told me happened because I wasn't there, I'm gone. I went to the rendezvous point, which was around a mountain bend, down a corner or down a hill, so that you couldn't see it from various angles of the cult. But you could see it if you had gone a certain distance around, down past this, the one and only restaurant in that small town. Hinterschmidt-Ruthi's like maybe 1,100 people if you're rounded up. And so what happened is they said that they came back, the guys came back running and said, that is Kal Korff, he just left. And they wanted to know what to do. And they said something like, find out what he's doing, whatever that means. I don't know how they're going to do that, right? And then my two people said, is there a problem? And they said, yes, this guy came in, and they didn't really explain who I was, but they said, I'm a troublemaker, and he's here doing something, they don't know what. And they said, well, we'll just come back tomorrow during the official visit day. We don't want any problems. They said, yeah, please do. So they left. And then they went to the rendezvous point, and we all got in the car, and we left. And then we went to Innsbruck, Austria, because we were done at that point. And, well, at least with the Meier cult. And then the next thing was to visit Meier's wife. And we decided we would visit the cult first, then Meier's wife, because if Meier's wife and I didn't hit it off, I didn't want her alerting Billy Meier that I was in town. So what happened is we worked with a friend of mine named Luke Oergein, wonderful researcher, very incredible guy. And he knew Calliope Meier. And he told her, I'm not a bad guy. And he said, I want to come over and meet you. And he didn't tell her that he brought us. So the three of us met Calliope Meier at her house. And with us was a pickup crew from Germany we'd brought in to film it, in addition to the cameras and my camera. And there's some footage of this has leaked on the internet. And at this point, we had the videotape of the Dean Martin girls, who we were told were Pleiadians and Pleiarans and Askid and Nera and these alien women. They were really dancers from the Dean Martin variety show. And we had the tape to prove it. So I met Calliope Meier. She was very cautious at first. And she said she heard the most horrible things about me from Billy Meier. And she told me some of that stuff. And that I was like out to destroy her husband, CIA disinfo, MIB type guy, all kinds of stuff that's not true. And I said, well, you know, we're here to expose the truth, and let me show you this tape. So she always thought that Billy Meier at least had some true experiences. He really lied to her to that level. Imagine you fake UFO contacts, and you use a UFO hoax to write your own religion, basically, and these messages are really your spiritual bullshit, but because you want to fool people and say, these are from the space people, instead of I'm just a Swiss farmer with an opinion, follow me, give me money, you fake all this stuff. She saw the tape, and she was shocked. She was, oh man, it was like, she was heartbroken, because she realized at that point, and that's what she said on the Fox special, when she holds up my book and says, this is the truth, that her husband had lied to her to that degree, to the point where he's filming shit off TV, telling his wife, these are aliens, selling it to the public. But your own wife? If the public is stupid enough to believe it, okay, it's not really okay, but you know what I mean. But your own wife? The woman who has bore you 3 children, and you name them Atlantis, Socrates, and Methuselah? So, gee, who's running the roost there? It was really an eye-opening moment, because I felt for her. She was clearly an abused woman, cheated on. He's viewed as a god there. She talked about that. And they'll do anything he asks them to, and that is scary. So it was interesting seeing her. And she was not doing well, because not only was her life over, but her daughter, their one and only daughter, had been in an accident and was brain damaged. And she was going to devote the rest of her life to taking care of her daughter, where Billy Meier could care less.
Wow, that's terrible, Cal. You know, we're going to have to take a break right here for station identification and a few words from our sponsors. We'll be right back, folks. This is Stephen Kennedy, and you are listening to The Fringe. The Fringe FM. We're back, my friends, and before the break we were talking with Kal Korff about Billy Meier's wife. Let's get back to it. And it's got to be terrible for her to have that illusion shattered if she believed that at least some of his contacts were real. Because I've heard several people say that they believe some of his contacts were real, but he needed more material, so he started faking stuff. That's another explanation some people give for the stuff that could be easily proven fake, you know?
They do, and you know something, I have looked very hard at that issue, because I think it's human nature to want to find at least one silver lining somewhere. But to be blunt, everything I have looked at shows no evidence of that, and not even a sighting of an airplane that he was mistaken on. These so-called contacts going back when he was 5 or 7 with Spoth, That's all retro revisionist stuff. There's no stuff at that time.
Yeah, I used to say that he retconned that. It's kind of like a comic book character where they change now we're doing a movie, so we have to have more backstory. Let's retcon this. And there's two questions that I'd still like to ask you on the Billy Meier case, and maybe we can move on to some other things. And that is, the first is that Michael Horn constantly cites these prophecies that Billy Meier apparently wrote and says that copyrights prove that he wrote that before. But when he was on my show, we learned that he has written the equivalent of 5 Bibles worth of predictions. So my explanation for if he does get any hits is just the same explanation that I have for some of the Edgar Cayce stuff, is that the volume of if you write enough predictions, sure, you're going to get 20 or 30 hits, and Michael Horn gave us 5 or 6 of them that he says these were written and copyrighted. But do you have any explanation for why he does get a few hits on these prophecies?
Yeah, and I will tell you that we addressed this. This was another thing that I documented in the book because it happened. Basically, before I went the first time undercover with Tina Layton to Switzerland in 1991, I was briefed very thoroughly by a man named Stan Swihart, who, of course, is Swiss. And because Meier didn't live in an area that was easily accessible, and you had to go down the mountain to get basic things, I had very detailed information about the area, and I also wanted to visit many of the locations, of course. So having this kind of detailed commando-type plan, thoroughly familiar with the area with these detailed maps, unfortunately, on none of them was Hinta Schmidruti, and that's where Meier lived. There was Schmidruti, but not Hinta Schmidruti. They didn't go down to 1/1500th elevation scale or something, just a hair above it. And the way the Swiss do their maps is you can have a town called Schmidruti, and Hinta means behind, like the backside of the mountain. Okay. There's Unter, and Über. That means above or below. Unterbaum, above or below the tree, So Hinta Schmidruti means that Meier lives on the ass side or the back side of Schmidruti. So a lot of maps aren't going to bother putting Hinta in there. So realizing that I need that kind of granular detail, here I am in Wetzikon. I'm with Tina Layton, and I said, we need a local map that maybe we'll have down to 100 meters maybe. So we go into this bookstore called Schnarrweiler, which was the only bookstore in the town. And I said to the clerk, who I think her name was Elsie Schroeder, as I recall, I said, I'm looking for Hinta Schmidruti. I'm looking for a map that shows me Hinta Schmidruti. Where can I get one? And she says, you must be here to see Mr. Meier. I said, well, yeah, I am actually. And I'm thinking, wow, what are the odds? I said, yes, I am. I said, I'm a big fan of his. In fact, I want to buy all the books he buys here. She says, yes, he's our big customer. He has an account here at our store. I went, wow, that's interesting. I'm thinking to myself, because do you have an account at a bookstore? Do you know anybody who does? No. But here's a leader.
I have an Amazon account. That's about it.
Okay. But, this is a bookstore, sells books and maps, old school. I don't even know if it's still around there. And he has an account there. I said, okay. I said, well, interesting. I said, she says, yeah, and she loved talking about him. She says, I said, how did you know I wanted to see Mr. Meier? And she says, because only people who want to go to Hinta Schmidruti are here to see Mr. Meier. And she explained why, where he lives, all that. She's very familiar with him. She said that he and his followers would come down every 4 to 6 weeks and buy all kinds of books. And that's why they had an account. And I said, well, can you show me the books that they buy? Because I want to be just like Billy. I'm such a fanboy. I want to buy his stuff, So she takes me around and she shows me these books on astronomy, outer space exploration, history. And I'm like, oh man, this is golden. I said, this woman has no idea that she is mapping his contact subjects here for me. And that's where he gets a lot of his stuff. And I say that you have to ignore the prophecy stuff because they've shifted the goalposts. They never used to talk about prophecies until the photos started to fall apart. But the Meier people will tell you, and I quoted them in the book, they told Steve Thomas, meaning me, that the photos are not important, that they're just props to get people to talk about the messages from the Pleiadians. That's the important stuff. And that's why this is a cult, because these messages aren't from any aliens, they're from Billy Meier's ego. And that's where they're from.
Yeah, and I guess the last question, or really something that I would like for you to explain to my audience, is this science fiction space sound. Because besides computers, you know, I grew up being a musician. I took piano lessons, but later I moved to synthesizers, much more interesting. And to me, that sound that they always say can't be identified, it just sounds like an early analog synthesizer to me. Can you explain to us where you think that sound came from?
Yes, and I didn't find it. Phil Langdon did, and it was a complete accidental discovery, and it's amazing. Do you remember the sequence where the object it's from a movie he took, where the object is flying over the pine tree and the house is in the background and it's brushing the top of the pine tree,
yes.
and the top of the pine tree is moving because it's supposedly a backwash from the object. Okay, well, not only is the tree not there again, and the family who owned the house in the background said, again, there's never been a tree there. So this is the second instance. But it turns out that the fishing line that was, when Phil Langdon was recreating that sequence, and I can send it to you for your show, it's identical. You see him standing there next to the potted tree, then he walks out of frame, and you see it's identical to Meier's at that image that he's pulling on the fishing line. Well, that fishing line, when it comes up against the microphone on the video camera, makes this synthesizer type noise. It's the wind coiling up in the strings, and it makes this noise. And it was an accidental discovery. This noise, because it brushed against the microphone of the camera, is the one that this fishing line creates this noise when it's coiled up and in the wind. It's identical. It was eerie, and it was an accidental discovery because it was really windy that day in England when he was filming that sequence. I think he's wearing a jacket that day, but I can send you this stuff. It was an accidental discovery.
My point is, when Michael Horn says that nobody's ever been able to recreate the sound or identify it, that's not factually correct. If somebody's got one that's almost exact, and you know, I can if you have like an audio recording of yours, I can put them both in an audio editor and look at the waveforms and see how close it is, or So.
Yeah, it sounds the same. I know that when you start digitally profiling it, then you have a problem that the digital source can induce artifacts and things like that. As far as
but it's
the
close.
visual,
it's so close that it's convincing enough to me. I'm sure that it's the same sound.
Yeah, it actually, when you think about it, have you ever taken a reel of a fishing line as a kid, and it spools out of control, and you end up with a bunch of coil coming off of the thing? Well, when you put that in the wind and brush it near a microphone, that's the sound you get. And it makes sense that Meier, when he was pulling on this, probably accidentally, did this and like, wow, that sounds cool. Now, I'm not saying somebody may not have played with the synthesizer later, because you can't accept the so-called audio recording as evidence of anything, because without a control, science cannot be applied. You have to go back to the photos, and this is what they keep now trying to avoid, which is the photos. They used to say nobody could duplicate them. If anybody duplicates them, we'll say it's a hoax. Wendell used to say that. Well, then they started to get duplicated, and then they said, well, just because you can duplicate them doesn't prove it's a hoax. They keep moving the goalposts. The photos are a fraud, there's no question.
Yeah, and someone has even on YouTube built the models, hung them, and photographed them with one arm tied behind his back. Yeah,
Phil Langdon has done that.
It's amazing.
I worked with him.
It's amazing to watch this stuff.
Yeah, it is. And Michael has tried to discredit Phil Langdon, and he has not been able to do it. And so one of the projects I'm going to do sometime next year, it's not number one, is I'm going to update the Spaceships of the Pleiades book. The new title is going to be called Fake Ships of the Pleiades,
That's
with
amazing.
FAKE in all caps. And I can send you a cover of the book. It's already done, and it shows our recreation of these sunset photos. I'll send you a copy of the book, and because Phil and I are friends, I was going to write it up and add his stuff and send it to him, and have him give whatever inputs, and then we can, release it.
Yeah, Michael
But I've wanted
Michael
to do this
Horn
for years.
tried to imply that he helped Phil Langdon try to recreate the photos or something like that, which I found kind of odd. Why would he want to help a guy who's trying to debunk the,
No, what Michael has done is he's put his 2 cents worth, but that doesn't mean anything. I have all of Phil's photos. He's given me the use of them unconditionally, and the agreement I have with him is if I ever do anything with them, I'm going to split whatever with him because, I should. He's been a buddy and a partner, and the motive isn't money anyway. If I wanted to make money off this stuff, I'd say it's all real.
Yeah. I wanted to know if we could get into some of your other books, because one of your other books that I thought was amazing was the Roswell UFO Crash, What They Don't Want You to Know.
Mm-hmm.
What is the bottom line that you got for writing that book? What is it that they don't want us to know about the Roswell case that you talk about in the book?
Well, I'm one of the 4 original Roswell researchers, and this is something that drives these right-click wonders today nuts, because they can't take this out of the universe. They can only deny it. So, again, I'm one of the 4 original researchers, Bill Moore, Stanton Friedman being 2 of the other 4. And we all know each other, and Stanton, of course, passed away earlier this year. And what happened is when I was in high school, there were 2 major incidents that happened between Friedman and I. One was the Betty and Barney Hill UFO case, because in the current issue of the Skeptical Inquirer, which just came out in the November-December issue, I have an article called From Cosmic Watergate to Cosmic Watermelon, the Stanton Friedman I Knew. And in this article, it shows a photograph from the San Francisco Examiner newspaper of me shocked. You see the look on my face when I'm looking at Friedman, because I can't believe the bullshit I'm hearing. And what he's telling me in the media at a press event that I arranged when I invited him to lecture with me when I was in high school. I started lecturing when I was just 13 years of age and being in the media and all that stuff as a so-called prodigy child. And Friedman was a mentor of mine. And what happened is he started saying that the space shuttle was going up in space now, and that would bring down the aliens, because we were joining the Galactic Federation, and they would read us the rules of the universe, blah, 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 and this would bring down the aliens because, we're regularly, joining whatever he thought was going on. And I'm like, do you really think so? Asked the startled Korff, as the articles show. And then what happened is in October 1976, Official UFO Magazine published an article by Bob Schaefer destroying the Betty Hill star map, the work of Marjorie Fish. Make a long story short, the article showed that another astronomer, Charles Atterberg, had found a better map, a match for the Hill star map. The fact that there was more than one match meant the map was a Rorschach now. In other words, the one thing that distinguished the Hill case from all other abductions was a so-called alien star map that Friedman always promoted as they're from Zeta Reticuli. We know this because of the work she did. Well, it turns out that's not true. And modern astronomical data from the Hipparcos satellite, launched in the 90s, which was launched to measure the distances of stars, totally destroyed the Hill star map. So Friedman knew that the Hill star map was not credible. He died lying to the public about it. The article is about that. It exposes it. It proves it. So this happened between Friedman and I when I was in high school, because when I found out from Schaefer that Atterberg had done this, I was pissed off, crushed, because I believed in the Hill case. I believed what Friedman said.
I really was upset when I saw the information. I think there's more than just what you're citing as proof that star map is not accurate at all. And I had always thought, wow, there's actual scientific proof here and data. We can look at it and it matches. And how did this woman that has no astronomy knowledge get this star map? And and I was upset because it was just that disappointment that you get, like, and I've had the same kind of thing with Bob Lazar and others that I thought at first were real, same kind of disappointment. And I knew Stanton nowhere near as well as you, but towards the end of his life, we used to talk on the phone a lot, and I once pressed him on that stuff, and he said, well, there's multiple interpretations then of what, and we can agree to disagree. I believe that the Hill case is real, and the star map shows what I believe it shows. And since he was since he's a nuclear physicist and much more educated than me, I just I didn't press him on it. I wanted to remain friends and have that sort of. He was kind of mentoring me as well. Right when I started my show, I started talking to him, and we were friends, and then I was respectful enough of him that I didn't press him on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to be pushy.
Yeah, I understand. The second thing that happened with us, which is in line with what you're just saying, and I thank you for sharing that, because I think people need to know the genesis of your involvement with him. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we remain friends as well, but we agreed to disagree. But in my case, I could say in front of a judge, and I've got the files from the 70s still, I've published some images of them, in fact, from the Atterberg correspondence, because what I did was I told Stan, I said, Schaefer, both of you can't be right. One of you is wrong. I will be the guy in the middle to run the trap, and whatever the truth is, we'll deal with it. So I wrote Atterberg every week for over a year with the Smith Corona typewriter. Those files have now been found after all these years, and they're carbon copies of the letters, originals. And I threw everything that anybody had, because I went to everybody, Carl Sagan, Friedman, you name it, Schaefer, threw it all there, was the guy in the middle. And I got frustrated with Friedman. I said, don't tell me you're not an astronomer, I don't know, and then you promote the fish thing. He has nailed it, and he's done it in a way where anybody can prove it. He's right. He used more updated data. And it wasn't Fish's fault. The Gliese Star Catalog got updated every 5 years back then. Sure. Now it's pretty much real time from space. And then when the Hipparcos satellite was matched, I think it was 16 of the 20 odd stars fell apart. So it just isn't true. And he knew this. So his claim, agree to disagree, whatever, I'm sorry, he wasn't telling you the truth. Now, the second thing that happened was much more serious, and that led to the Roswell book. What happened is, in high school, Bill Moore comes to visit me. We interview before the press. Bill Moore brings out, for the first time I'm seeing them, the uncropped 8x10 images of the Roswell debris photographed in Ramey's office. And I'd seen them in the book, but they were cropped. And I noticed in the book that there was some text on the memo in Ramey's hand. And now I'm looking at the 8x10s that are uncropped, the best copies out there that Friedman has and Moore have. And I said, Bill, can I have these photos? I said, I think I can blow this up here and read that memo, okay? There's something there. And that's why I laugh today when people are looking at that memo today, like as if it was an original discovery, recent, it's bullshit. We solved that in the 80s. And so what happened is I took it to Al Reed. I took the photos. We put it on the ACFA stat camera, blew it up, got it down to the grain of the photo, and we could tell that it was basically a press dispatch. And it wasn't some secret order to cover this up. And I told Stan, I said, Stan, these are the original Roswell photos. You have them. This is not the debris from a spaceship. This is a kite. It's aluminum. Look. Come on. You're going to tell me you couldn't tear this or dent it with a 16-pound sledgehammer? And here it is, crumpled, dented, broken. And this black stuff is a balloon that's been in the sun for weeks. Hello? It's right there at his feet. And then Friedman looks at me. And he wore those glasses, right?
Yeah.
And his eyes got big, and I could see them big through the glasses. And he says, there must have been a debris switch. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. This is the father of Roswell. And I'm crushed at this point. I'm a kid. I'm crushed. I'm like, oh my God, this is a photo, the uncropped stuff, and you're telling me they switched the debris because you don't want to face the fact that there's no spaceship debris here. Right, yeah. So Roswell was solved at that point. And then
And do you still believe that it was just a weather balloon? And what do you think of those people that have blown up that memo and gotten part of the sentences that mention bodies and debris and things like that? There's been a lot of image.
there has been, but you have to back up for a couple of things. So now years go by, and Roswell, because of Unsolved Mysteries, gets a second life. Frank Kaufman, all these people come out. Glenn Dennis, who were never there before. They're not in the original Roswell incident book by Berlitz and Moore. They came out after Unsolved Mysteries aired. And that's what really surprised me, because having been involved in the original investigation, we would have found some of these people. You couldn't miss a Glenn Dennis if he really had been involved from day one. So because, it's a small town. They all knew each other. And Fred Kaufman was the president of the Roswell Chamber of Commerce. How friggin' convenient. So what happened was 1997 is coming up, and I talked to Prometheus. And I said, what are you doing for the 50th anniversary of Roswell? Because the media is going to go nuts. They said, we're not doing anything. I said, why? I said, you don't have a second 50th. And I appreciated the anniversary stuff because I'd been on Larry King on the 30th anniversary of Kennedy's murder, solving that case. And I appreciate the fact that we're an anniversary society, unfortunately, and 50th is a big deal. So Prometheus says, we don't have a book that says anything credible about it. We've got Carl Flock's book. And he says, this is what Flock had said, I'm not making it up, that a mogul balloon slammed into a spaceship and both came down. I said, that's friggin' ridiculous. You might as well say it was just aliens. It's more credible. So Prometheus rejected his book. I said, look, I'll write it. I know the answers. I'll write it. I'll do the book. And they said, well, you got to get it to us in 30 days, man. It's October. Wow. So I got it in 30 days to them. It was probably, I think, 4.5 weeks. And that's why I kind of laugh when people have said, when they review it, they said fast-paced book. I didn't have a lot of time. So it was one big brain dump. I got a little Macintosh, sat in the basement for a month, pounded it out, and that's the book. And to my shock, it is the best-selling expose of Roswell of all time. So the original title was The Roswell UFO Crash Exposed. Prometheus says that'll never work. Instead, it's going to be What They Don't Want You to Know. And I said, well, who's they? Well, it's all the conspiracy nutters, because it's they. It's not the government. But people, because they have a bias towards conspiracies. They're so suspicious. They're disposed to them. They think they is whoever they want they to be.
Sure,
and people bought the book on that title, took it home, only to be shocked.
and be somewhat, if you want my honest take on it, when I read that, is I was thoroughly disappointed. And then I guess I would ask you, see, what happened in my case is I read probably the older books that were sort of supporting the alien hypothesis first. Mm-hmm. And then I read your book and I went, man, what a letdown. And then I read some books by Don Schmidt and a few others. And what do you say to some of the people? Because I had Don Schmidt on my show and he's very convincing, and his books I thought they were well researched, and Don Schmidt will basically say, I can tell you the name of the pilots that took the debris to Wright-Patterson. I can tell you the name of people who picked up the debris and said there's no way it was a weather balloon and things like that. So my journey in Roswell kind of went, yeah, I believe it had to be alien. And then we get to your book and I went, man, what a letdown. But that's probably the simplest explanation. And then we get to further books that support the alien hypothesis. And then the work that was done on that memo seems convincing to me, but you're still convinced that it was an ordinary event that's just been blown and turned into a myth.
Yeah, I'll tell you the biggest problem with the so-called cosmic Watergate, and I think if you really, and of course I wish you the best going forward in whatever shows you do in the future with any UFO researchers, but going forward, I would ask you to consider asking all future guests this one question. And I'm going to revisit this issue in my upcoming media event on November 22nd, where I'm launching a series that takes out the Kennedy conspiracy BS. Got to do it on the anniversary, of course, starting with the grassy knoll eyewitnesses. They all get eliminated credibility-wise. Here's the issue. I call it the Mossad problem. Any conspiracy person, even Friedman, would admit Mossad is the biggest badass intel agency on the planet, hands down. Okay, having said that, if Roswell really happened, or any UFO crash, or any of these incidents are out there and the government has military data, smoking gun images, radar trackings, landings, physical evidence, anything that they can take to the bank, analyze, reverse engineer, whatever. Where are the secret Mossad UFO Roswell files, or any UFO files? Where are they? Where are there any defectors from Mossad or any other intelligence agency post-Cold War? There's been tens of thousands of them, literally hundreds of thousands of them, who have released all kinds of stuff. We have the complete engineering designs of all Russian warheads.
Yeah, right about that.
Okay, so where are the people who had to study this? Their replacements, when they were transferred, when they gave their briefings, how many departments? Over 70-something years, there would have to be thousands of people. But where are they? Where's their secret diaries left behind? Where's any leaks? It's not there. So when Mossad starts caring about the UFO subject, Kal Korff is going to start caring when they care about aliens. Until then, I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways. And this problem is very real, because when I left the U.S. and I started hanging out with all kinds of people who were the right people at the time in the Cold War, who were the people who either would have blown up this planet or not in a nuclear holocaust, they were on the front line. To a person, there's nothing there. You don't have top secret German intelligence files, Russian files, all this other stuff. It's not there. And if you go to Mossad, the entity, it's not there. So contrary to what Friedman said, absence of evidence is, at times, indeed evidence of absence. There's a distinct absence of evidence as to why pigs don't fly, because they don't fly. Okay? So what really woke me up was when I went to work at Lawrence Livermore Lab. And I'll share with you something I've never talked in public about before, but I can prove it. What happened is I had been hired at Lawrence Livermore Lab, and I was the only person there who didn't have a degree, and I'm overseeing people who have PhDs and all this. And I got into all kinds of stuff, from SDI to hypermedia. And what happened is the San Jose Mercury News calls me, and they say, Kal, we haven't done a story on you in a few years, wondering what you're doing. Can I come out and see you, and we'll just wing it? I said, sure. So this lady comes over, nice reporter, and she writes this big story. It's on 2 different pages in the paper, front big story, and it says UFO buff switches his attention to computers. And it talks about how I was into UFOs and how I'm really now into hypermedia. I'm a multimedia pioneer on the HyperCard team and doing this stuff at Lawrence Livermore Lab, and I'm going to bring hypermedia to the government. And what I ended up doing was writing the classified viewgraph system using HyperCard, because I was horrified to find out when I went into an area under escort in the SDI program that there was no classified viewgraph tracking system. People could go in and grab classified slides, take them out, and bring them back on their honor. And if they were spies, nobody would know. And that really bugged me. So I wrote that system. I had access to real indexes because we were using HyperCard. It was a brand new thing. The hyperlink, the fact that you could click on a document name and it would go and open that document. Back then, we were using ARPANET, DARPANET, and a network called Octopus, which was the internal classified intranet, is what they would call it today. This is again back in the 80s. So what happens is this article comes out, and it talks about how I'm going to do HyperCard, hypermedia, and that One day people will read about me on a hypercard. The internet browser had not been invented yet. And it's all in this article. And it's never been on the web because I never uploaded it. It's not part of the archives online in San Jose Mercury News. I can post it anytime. My photo's there, both of them, shows me on the computer, all that stuff. So make a long story short, I looked at all the activity that was going on in the late 40s up to Roswell. There were no other aviation incidents that could account for the Roswell story. But you have to go back to the beginning. As I said in the book, and it is something that Don Schmitt cannot get away from, or anybody, the original Roswell witnesses never described a ship, never described a body. In fact, of the 7 so-called original witnesses, Loretta Proctor never held any debris. She made it clear she never did. When her husband died, Floyd, she made up a story that she held it, tried to bend it, twist it. So she's not credible. Jesse Marcel, I was the first one to get his military file with Bob Todd. First one to publish it. I had no idea in high school, and neither did Friedman, that Marcel was a bullshitter. He wasn't a guy who shot down 5 enemy aircraft. He didn't have a degree in physics. He never went to that school. It says in his evaluation, right after Roswell, he has a tendency to magnify problems he's confronted with. He exaggerated. General Ramey noted his career was limited if he wasn't going to be a real pilot, so he could not have flown the debris. He wasn't a pilot in the only nuclear airbase at the area, which was full of the Top Gun pilots. So all this is true. It doesn't matter what Don Schmitt says. And we know that Dr. Andrew Tchaikovsky, Dr. Tchaikovsky, he looked at that debris, made a phone call, said, this looks like the stuff you're flying down there. I interviewed Professor Charles Moore, and Professor Charles Moore told me point blank that he met with Friedman and Berliner in Socorro. They had run an ad in the paper soliciting Roswell witnesses. He went there to tell them it was mogul, not a weather balloon, but mogul. Very different issue. The idea is a weather balloon is a false, phony straw man. It wasn't. It was a spy device. Period. Bigger than the Washington Monument, okay, which is 555 feet tall. It was about 650 feet tall. And Irving Newton, who was there, who posed with the debris, he later went to Moore's house, and this is all documented on film, saw the original material that it was still kept from there, and said, yes, this is exactly what I held in the office. It's there. So
the explanation that even he gave that the debris was switched later, you know, with that famous photo, he was forced to sort of, you know, their story kind of goes that he was forced to kind of play the government line and you know, pose with this debris that's not what he claimed that was not what he saw at the debris field. The debris switch you're saying is not what happened.
No, in fact, General Dubose, who was there, said, quote, "Oh, bull, there was no debris switch." And I quoted him in the interview. And ironically, I used the interview that Kevin Randall gave with him because I wanted people to realize that the truth about Roswell is out there. If you really research the books that bullshit everybody on it, I take out 22 of them, including Randall and Schmitt. There's a reason Randall doesn't deal with Schmitt anymore. Randall's more credible than Schmitt, but Randall has his issues. Randall used to endorse Kaufman. I debated both of them on ABC TV. They lost the debate. I pointed out a simple fact. He wasn't in the military at the time of Roswell. Game over. So don't tell me about your military career in Roswell when you weren't even in the service at the time. Come on. Hello?
Yeah, I did. I'm sure that I have, you know, sort of observed that the story just grew and grew as the myth and the legend of it grew. And I think you're right in that Unsolved Mysteries. I remember seeing that as a kid, and that just blew that whole story up. And then suddenly there's all these new witnesses, and you know.
Yeah, that's what happened, and it's amazing because. When you look at surveys that were done, you know, with Kennedy being the big grand conspiracy, to this day, now I think only 61% of Americans believe it instead of 81%. But there's valid reasons why they did and didn't believe in it. The government was its own worst enemy. They were absolutely covering things up. And then when the government finally starts telling the truth, people are so jaded, they're like, well, I don't believe you, you know. And it's reached that point now. And I'll tell you what destroyed my childhood on October 19th, 1973, is I'm looking at the Greenhoff photos. And either it shows a real alien or it doesn't. Either people are liars, including the chief of police, or we're being visited and we need to know this. Either way, the ramifications, I thought, as a young kid, were profound. And I thought, okay, now I go down to the library and I start reading books by Adamski, and there's aliens on the backside of the moon and on Venus and on Saturn. I'm like, I know better. I'm like, my God, adults outright lie. Hell of a thing for a kid to realize. And I thought, you know, if this sickness, this belief in stupidity, where you just abandon any pretense of critical thinking, becomes mainstream and jumps from the fringe to mainstream society, and it just takes enough of the percent of the people to do that, especially if they vote, that's scary, then we're doomed as a species. And that's what I see going on now. To me, the polarization in the politics is just a symptom of the fact that people are suspicious of everything, don't trust anything, you name it. It may be Trump today, but it's another subject tomorrow. Same principle. And this is why we're losing it, because we're not thinking critically and we're not going back to fundamentals and basics of who, what, where, why, when, and how. When you nail those down, you've got clear understanding, clear communication. And the greatest thing about facts is that they can be verified by anybody wishing to do so.
Yeah, I am hugely big on citing sources that anybody can go after me and find the same thing. And I hear you talk about this thing called right-click researchers, because, you know, us younger guys, you know, we have the benefit of the internet, but it seems to me that, like, nobody does things on the ground. I have done amazing work just picking up the phone, and I'm amazed that the younger crowd does not just pick up the phone, try to talk to people, witnesses, or sources, and get their story direct on the phone. We even have an aversion to that, and you talk about this thing called right-click researchers, which I think is so funny. It's like, if it's not on the internet, they don't do it. You know?
Yeah, it's not only that, it's even worse, and you're absolutely right on all the points you make, because first of all, most people have their browser set for the top 10 hits. That's it. Okay. And then, as you know, there's games with the indexing of these things. If I want to pay money, I can publish bullshit on the internet, and it'll be the number one hit if you search on my bullshit. I just got to pay Google, you know, and pad it with the right metadata. And then there's the other thing, and well, it's not on the internet. I search on Google, so it must not be true. So one recent example is I told people that there's a complaint being put together against TTSA. And people said, well, I checked it. It's not true. Well, really? Well, who did you check with? You didn't ask me, and I'm the guy who knows about it. And I've got firsthand info on it. I recently did an expose, an update on Bob Kvyat's lawsuit against upcoming up, where it implicates CI disinfo guy, Dr. Rand Pandolfi, Congressman Marriott, and Joe Fromage and his techno scam at InterNASA. Similar to TTSA, again, Hal Plutoff has been involved in that scam as well. So that's now going to court. I updated that expose. The idea that Pandolfi will go under oath, penalty of perjury, is quite exciting, because one way to hold these guys accountable is to put them under oath and penalty of perjury. They can't afford to have that happen. That would include people like Michael Horn, because there's consequences when you try to do that. And in this case here, there had been a settlement in the case, agreed to by the court, and then they basically BS the court, and now the court has vacated it, and they're going to court unless something settles out of the blue. This is an exciting story. There's another expose coming up about Harry Reid. There's some inside whistleblower info about him and the ATIP scam and where the money went and all that other stuff. I'm working that very quietly.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that so many UFO stories lead to Bob Bigelow, which he's kind of like, I hate to say it, but he's kind of like, he comes off like a James Bond villain or like a movie character, because here's this billionaire and he's got his hands in so many different UFO stories, from Bob Lazar to this A-tip thing to the Skinwalker Ranch. He's a pretty fascinating character.
Yes, but I think that it's easy to explain because he's got Hal Puthoff as his main guy. And of course, Puthoff has his homeboy, Eric Davis. Those two guys have been involved in techno scams for years, going back to the 70s. When I was in high school, as the press articles from that time prove, I was the assistant director of research for parapsychology at the Institute of Paranormal Science, which worked with SRI at that time. So I know, going back to high school, that the stuff with Uri Geller and a lot of the stuff they were doing there was just pure frauds. And of course, back then, Hal Puthoff was pushing the E-meter and Scientology. Yeah. And you can't take that out of the universe. He says, "Oh, I'm not one anymore." Doesn't matter. Same problem, different scam. So I've been in touch with people in D.C. There are investigators working on this. I've been very clear that in December there will be this complaint that will be sent to TTSA. They will have, I've been told, 45 days to respond to it. If they don't respond to it, then it'll get interesting.
Yeah, the big problem that a lot of my listeners ask me, I did a show on TTSA and I did a lot of digging, and the biggest problem that I have with them is they're supposed to be a public benefit corporation. And if you look into their finances, and they have to file some kind of they have to give a balance sheet. It's very troubling that they're soliciting money when they are spending it on crazy stuff, apparently, when you look at the balance sheet, and it just nothing adds up financially. It just does not add up. Like, where's the money coming from? Where's it going? And when are these people that gave you money to invest going to get their dividends or whatever? And it just doesn't seem on the level to me.
Yeah, it based on what I've seen, I have made the claim, and I think I can defend this. And if it turns out it's not true, I'll be happy to correct the record. But it gives every appearance of being a pump and dump scheme. And there's two things that have happened recently, and it has caused some changes to be made to the complaint. And again, I have access to whistleblower info, just like I have named the whistleblower in the upcoming Pandolfi issue, the whistleblower there. And there's recordings of Pandolfi perjuring himself. I've got those original emails, everything. It's an open and shut case. So I have been sending this stuff back east, including to different investigators with, I'll just say, the right three-letter agencies that can trace this down. Because the issue is Pandolfi doing this on his own, or has he gone rogue? Whenever you have a former deputy director of the CIA involved in techno scams, it is a potential security issue for the country. When you have Pandolfi claiming he briefs President Trump when he doesn't, Secret Service needs to know about that. If I claim I briefed Trump and I don't, I need to be reported to the Secret Service. That's just reality. So back to TTSA. Issue is, the one thing you can say based on their filings is that the money goes to Tom DeLonge. He got money again for the arts parts. I'm sorry, as the person who exposed arts parts, I was the one to do it in my book, The Roswell UFO Crash. What they don't want you to know, you can get it on Amazon. That this thing was exposed in the 90s. Even Art Bell knew it was a hoax. He admitted later was. Open and shut case, it makes no sense, but Linda Moulton Howe is in there. These people are not credible. But one thing I noticed, they now have a guy on their board who has a tainted track record of pump and dump. He's been under investigation by the SEC. In fact, when I talked to SEC about TTSA, they told me point blank that one of the things they've started to do was check all intelligence databases around the world. Now, that's something they normally don't bother with because they have a real concern that this is a pump and dump scam. And this guy that he's been brought on now, I think his last name is Meiser, interesting last name, they're now targeting medical devices. And that is potentially horrifying because if you have the so-called standards of science for arts parts applied to a medical device, people will die. Think about it.
This whole thing is crazy to me because I remember following Art's Parts originally, and again coming out disappointed that Linda Moulton Howe is a terrible source that can't be trusted. So as soon as I heard that the source of these so-called, and they basically said that these are possibly alien materials, then they backpedaled, and I got in trouble because I caught them using a stock image of a common earthly rock when they're making these announcements. And to me, why are you posting a picture of a common earth rock when it's supposed to be alien materials, Yeah. But it's just a picture that looks good. So, and the TTSA fanboys, I call them, have attacked me mercilessly. I kind of stopped talking about it because I don't want, I'm kind of waiting to see what happens because I think it's going to crash and burn. That's my best guess.
Yeah, I think it's going to crash and burn for the only reason that matters, and I think you're right on this, is because there's nothing there. If not, you can only push nothing for a certain amount of time. So let's say it does crash and burn a year from now, just to make up an example. Then what are you left with? You're left with people who got ripped off. So what I'm trying to do is focus the media and doing my part as a journalist and working with investigators in DC. I've done, over the decades, I have worked with different government agencies and things of mutual interest. I was one of the people who found evidence, independent of anybody else, that Iran had a rogue nuclear weapons program. I turned over that evidence and software that they were using to avoid sanctions to various intelligence agencies, including Mossad, for example, because I know Israel needed to know that info. And I was in a position to get it in Prague, and I did, and it's a matter of record, and I have a copy of that software to protect my ass, because at the time, the Obama administration didn't want to hear it, Everything was good with Iran, which is nonsense. So anyway, I've been involved in all this stuff, so I have been dealing with investigators back east. And there's one thing that was rather interesting in the recent change to the board personnel with TTSA, which again has caused investigators to look at this. I wondered why it was that a media-savvy president, Trump in this case, all this stuff's going on about UFOs, TTSA, History Channel, all that, New York Times, and the White House is largely silent. Look how long it was, Steve, before Trump finally said something about UFOs. It was well over a year after the New York Times story.
I found that strange, too, because he is definitely the most media-savvy president and also a manipulator, a master manipulator, I would say, of the media.
Absolutely.
And he just ignored the whole thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So he missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity, which, you can interpret that one of two ways with Trump. So now, the only way that would be possible is if somebody in the White House communications hierarchy made the determination not to allow this data to boil up to the point where the president would get a whiff of it. Because, he, other than the stuff he looks at himself, there are people who screen and filter his stuff. That's what they do for big guys, okay? Well, could that explain it? Well, it turns out that one of the newest member of TTSA was a former deputy big shot in the communications director of the White House for 18 months. And he left right after the History Channel did their thing. And now he's with TTSA. What are the odds?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I want to encourage my listeners, you can just search on Amazon to get Kal's books. But if you want people to contact you, is there a way that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, my Facebook page is open to the public, so most people have Facebook. You can easily find me. Also, if you want to email me, it's kalkorff@yahoo.com. Had that email address forever. I'm a pretty reachable guy. Also, you can click on some of the links for articles, like on my Medium page. So, or if they want to try to reach me through you, that's fine. I have not reactivated my web pages because I'm just not sure they're needed because they're redundant. I put everything on my Facebook page. Why should I have a kalkorff.com page, even though I have that domain that says the same thing? I don't know.
I'm right there with you. I just direct the .com to go to the Facebook page because it's so much easier than maintaining the web page and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so when these updates come out, we'll have all this figured out because we've got partners. I have coming out on November 22nd, it should be on Amazon, the upcoming expose on Annie Jacobson. And I had written that 7, 8 years ago, and it was published in the newspapers. But it's alive again because, again, lack of opposition. So I've decided to expand it to a book, get it out there, and then I'm done with that issue. But at least when people search on her, she'll be able to find out that, her book is not true.
Well, my friends, that music means that our time is running out here on the Midnight Hour show. In these past couple of weeks, together, we have gone down the rabbit hole of the Billy Meier case. And I don't know about you, but I am sufficiently convinced after this time that there's not much to the Billy Meier case. I think the evidence just isn't there. It falls apart under all scrutiny. And our guest tonight, Kal Korff, to his credit, has pointed me in the direction of what I believe is the truth. Tonight, I tried to get to the truth, and I took you with me on this journey. Until our next journey together, my friends, good night.